Wyoming Territory, late September of 1877. The wind bit deep that morning in the town of Rawlins, sweeping dust across the wooden sidewalks and rattling the hanging sign over McCready's General Store. Liora Gaines stood just outside its door, arms wrapped tight around her middle, trying to look like she belonged there. Her dress was worn thin at the elbows. Her boots had holes at the toes. She had not eaten since the morning before, and that had only been a half slice of cornbread some woman tossed her way when she passed through Medicine Bow. People passed her with quick glances, pretending not to see her. She was used to that. Being 22 and alone had a way of stripping the softness from people's eyes. Hunger made everything quieter. It dulled the sound of the street, of horses' hooves on packed dirt, of the church bell tolling noon in the distance. The door to the store opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, broad across the shoulders. He wore a trail coat dusted in red dirt, hat pulled low. A rope sat coiled at his hip, and a rifle barrel rose above his saddlebag just behind him. He paused when he saw her. She looked away. He did not. Instead, he moved toward her with an easy walk like he had nowhere to be. In his hands was a cloth sack folded at the top. He stopped in front of her and held it out. "You hungry?" he asked. His voice was warm, steady, the kind that did not rush or judge. She looked up at him, blinking hard. "I do not have any money." "Did not ask you for any," he said. "Just asked if you're hungry." She stared at the sack, then back at his face. For the first time in weeks, someone had looked at her like she was still human. Slowly, she reached out and took the sack from his hands. Inside was bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small tin of beans. Her fingers trembled. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "Name's Vayden Whitlow." "Liora Gaines," she said softly. "Well, Miss Gaines," he said, "you eat slow, plenty in there. And when you're done, I'll be right over there." He nodded to his horse tied off by the trough. "Not in a hurry." She sat on the store steps, opening the sack and tearing a small piece of bread. The warmth of the food filled her chest before it even hit her stomach. Vayden leaned against the hitching post, arms crossed, watching the street but glancing her way now and then. Not in a suspicious way, just making sure she was all right. When the sack was nearly empty, she stood and walked over to him, hands still holding what was left. "I will pay you back," she said. "You do not owe me anything, I do. I did not help you because I expected something." Liora's eyes shimmered. "Folks do not give unless they want something. I am not folks." That made her smile, the smallest smile, the first in a long while. "Where are you headed?" "South. Got a small spread outside Saratoga. Just me and a few head of cattle and a barn that leaks on my left boot." She blinked. "You have land?" "Not much, but it is mine. Bought it with my own hands, built the fence myself, still fixing the roof." She looked down. "I do not have anywhere to go." "You got family?" She shook her head. "They passed. Then the man I married ran off 2 winters ago, took the last of the money and left me in Cheyenne. I have been walking town to town since." He looked at her for a long moment. "You do not deserve that. No one seems to care." "I do." She lifted her eyes to his. "Why?" "Because you are standing, not begging. You are still trying." Her throat tightened. Vayden shifted his weight and looked toward the open stretch of road. "I could use help on the land, not heavy work. Just someone to keep things in order. You'd have your own space, food, a roof that mostly keeps the rain out. You do not even know me." "Do not need to," he said. "I see enough right now." She hesitated. The wind picked up again, sweeping her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear. "You would let me come with you? I would like that." She looked down at the sack in her hands, then back up at him. "All right." He smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that made her chest ache in a different way. They rode out of Rawlins that afternoon, her behind him on his horse. arms wrapped around his waist because she had no other choice, but she did not mind. It had been a long time since she had touched anyone. His warmth against her was steady, like the sun after a storm. The trail was quiet. He let her be. No questions, no prying. Just the sound of hooves and wind and the occasional bird overhead. By the time they reached his land the next morning, something in Liora had already started to shift. She had not spoken much, but she had watched him. The way he moved. The way he spoke to his horse like it was a person. The way he walked through his land like it was something sacred. The cabin was small but clean. A porch with a rocking chair. A barn with a sagging roof. A chicken coop with 2 hens that squawked when they arrived. He helped her down from the horse like she was something fragile. She was not, but he treated her like she mattered. "You can take the room inside," he said. "I sleep in the loft." She looked around. "This is more than I expected. I do not offer what I cannot give." She turned to him. "Why are you being so kind?" He looked at her, steady and quiet. "You looked like someone who needed someone to believe in her again." She swallowed hard. That night, she curled up beneath a quilt in the little room, the scent of wood smoke in the air, and listened to the creak of floorboards above where he slept. For the first time in years, she did not cry herself to sleep, and outside the wind had finally quieted. The high plains settled into autumn slow and sure, gold weaving through the grasslands and the aspens up the ridge turning like flame. Liora rose early each morning, her hands raw from work she didn't yet have the rhythm for, but she moved through it without complaint. Vayden didn't hover. He showed her how to carry water from the spring without sloshing it, how to gather eggs without trouble from the hens, and how to keep the stove burning low through the night. Then he left her be. Inside the cabin, she swept the floorboards and mended a tier in a curtain that hung crooked over the single window. She peeled potatoes in the doorway when the light was good and fed the chickens with a quiet patience that settled deeper in her bones each day. By the 6th morning, a wagon appeared on the edge of the property, its wheels crunching over the frost-stiff grass. Vayden was chopping firewood near the barn, and he set the axe down as the driver pulled up. "Got that order for you, Whitlow," the man called, standing to stretch his back. "Took near a week to round up those nails." Vayden reached for the bag of feed in the wagon's bed. Liora stepped out from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've got help now?" the driver asked, raising a brow. Vayden didn't look her way. "She's not for you to mind." The other man lifted his hands, didn't mean anything by it. He nodded toward the cabin. "Nice porch, needs paint." Liora stepped back inside. That evening she stood behind the house, staring out past the fence line. Vayden came up quiet beside her, chewing a stem of dry grass. "Folks'll talk," she said. "They always do. I don't want to make it harder on you." He watched the sky a while before answering. "If I was worried what others thought, I'd have never bought land in the first place." She folded her arms. "It's different for women, I know." She turned toward him then. "Why are you letting me stay?" "I got no interest in watching someone freeze through another Wyoming winter." "That's not all of it." "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. He didn't say anything more. That night, she lit the oil lamp and sat at the table, thumbing through an old almanac she found in a chest near the hearth. Vayden came in with snow on his shoulders, boots heavy with mud. He left them at the door and moved to the wash basin. "You ever read one of those before?" he asked, nodding toward the book. She traced a finger over the page. "My father used to read from one each spring. Said if you listened close, the land would tell you everything you needed to know." "Smart man." She looked up. He was. They shared stew in silence, the sound of the fire popping between them. When she stood to clear the bowls, he stopped her. "You've done enough today. I don't mind, still. Sit." She hesitated, then did. He leaned back in his chair. "I'll head into Saratoga next week. Need to trade some pelts, maybe pick up seed. You're welcome to come." "I'm not sure I'd be welcome there." "Don't matter to me if you are or not." She studied his face, the lines near his eyes, the way his jaw set when he was thinking. "You always this steady?" He raised an eyebrow. "You mean dull," she smiled. "No, I mean, not afraid to stand still." He looked down at his hands. "Took a long time to learn how," she nodded slowly. "I'm still learning." "Well," he said, standing and reaching for the kettle, "no better place for it than here." She watched him pour the water into the tin basin to wash up, the steam rising in slow curls. Something settled between them then, not spoken, not touched, but real all the same. That night, as the wind picked up again and the first hard snow began to fall, Liora pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling above. She could hear his footsteps below, soft against the boards, steady in their pacing. Not waiting, just there. And for the first time since she'd taken his hand and climbed onto his horse, she let herself believe that maybe this wasn't just a place to rest. Maybe it was a place to begin. The snow held through early October, crusting the fence rails and muffling the world, but it softened the sounds between two people learning each other's quiet. Vayden had begun repairing the barn roof before the weather turned, but now the boards waited stacked beneath a tarp, patient as the man himself. Liora spent her days near the hearth, mending what she could, her hands growing steadier with each stitch. By the second week, she no longer flinched when he entered the cabin. Her shoulders didn't tighten when he stepped near. Instead, she began to ask questions about the land, the neighbors, the way certain birds vanished before the first hard frost. One morning, he came in from the shed with a pair of worn gloves, setting them on the table without a word. She ran her thumb over the stitching. "I figured you might want your own," he said, voice low from the cold. "There's a wire fence on the south side that needs checking. I could use your eyes." She nodded once, slipping her hands into the gloves. They were too big across the palms, but she didn't say so. They walked the fence together, boots crunching in rhythm across half-frozen ground. The air carried the sharp scent of pine, and something faintly sweet rotting apples from the tree line to the west. Vayden showed her where the wire had pulled loose from a post, and together they reset it, her fingers clumsy but willing. He didn't correct her, just mirrored her movements until she found her own way. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked, brushing dirt from her skirt, once or twice, "but I always came back." "Why?" He leaned on the post, gaze fixed toward the low hills. "Because nowhere else ever felt like mine." She pressed a hand to the wood, warm from the sun. "I've never belonged anywhere." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, she stayed up later than usual, reading through an old pamphlet she'd found tucked inside a drawer, something about soil rotation and barley yields. When she looked up, Vayden was sitting at the stove sharpening a blade, the motion slow and even. "You ever think about getting more stock?" she asked. "Not until now." "Why now?" He met her eyes across the small room. "Because it's not just me anymore." She set the pamphlet down, the weight of his words settling around her shoulders. "I could learn. Chickens are one thing, but I could handle more. I believe you." After a moment, she stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The moon caught on the drifts and made the world glow faintly blue. She didn't turn when she spoke. "I still wake up sometimes expecting to be somewhere else, somewhere colder, not in temperature but in feeling. I know that kind of cold." She looked back, his face lit by the orange light of the stove. "You ever lose someone?" He nodded once. "My brother. He drowned in the North Platte when we were boys. I was supposed to watch him. I didn't." She stepped closer. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be." She hesitated, then sat on the bench near the stove. My mother used to sing while she cooked, even when things were bad. I haven't heard a song since she died. He didn't speak for a long while. Then, softly, he said, my mother played the fiddle, poorly. But she never stopped, said music made the work lighter. Liora smiled just a little. I'd like to hear that. You ever sing? Not since Cheyenne. He looked at her, not asking for more, just waiting. She folded her hands in her lap. If I could make this place into something steady, something that wouldn't break beneath me, I might sing again. His voice was quiet. Then let's build it. And she believed him. Not because of his words, but because of the way he said them, with no urgency, no demand. Just quiet certainty, like the sun would rise and the barn would hold and the spring would come. Later, when they each retired to their corners of the cabin, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of something strong and slow growing, like roots pressing down through frost-hardened soil, finding warmth beneath the cold. The morning frost had turned to a wet shimmer across the grass by the time Liora stepped outside, apron tied at her waist, hair pinned back in the hurried way she'd learned when the chores began to feel like her own. Vayden was in the pasture with a new length of rope, guiding a young steer toward the pen. She watched the way he moved with it, patient, unforced, as if the animal would follow him simply because he asked. She didn't interrupt, just leaned against the porch post, holding a tin pail by its handle. The wind had shifted since yesterday, carrying the scent of wet soil and old pine needles. When he glanced up and noticed her, he nodded once, then turned back to the steer. Inside, she fed the fire and set a pot of water to boil, her shoulders no longer tensed at the quiet. It had become a comfort, like a familiar coat, the kind passed down, mended at the seams, still warm. Later, when Vayden came in, she was sorting dried beans on the table. Came across some old fence iron out near the draw, he said, taking off his coat. Looks like someone used to run more cattle here than I do now. She didn't look up. You ever think about asking someone to help work the land with you, not just for a season, I mean? I did once, he said, brushing dirt from his sleeves, when I first bought it. Offered a man a share, promised him a roof and a cut of the herd if he stayed 5 years. He left after 2 months, said the silence got under his skin. Her hands paused on the table. And you didn't try again? I figured if someone couldn't stand the quiet, they wouldn't last the winter. She considered that. I don't mind the quiet, I know. Something in the way he said it went deeper than the words. That afternoon, she followed him to the far side of the property where the creek narrowed and ran along a stretch of alder brush. He carried a shovel and a canvas bag. She brought a jar of pickled carrots wrapped in cloth. There's good soil here, he said, kneeling beside the bank. Stays damp through the summer. I was thinking we might try a row of tobacco, not for sale, just enough for trade. She crouched beside him. I've never planted it before. I haven't either, he admitted. But I met a Choctaw man once who said it grows sweet if you speak to it while you work. She tilted her head. You gonna talk to the plants? I'll talk to anything that listens. She laughed. The sound startled a bird from the brush. It flew low, wings brushing the tops of the grass, and was gone. They worked in rhythm, clearing a patch of earth. She pulled stones from the soil while he dug, both of them quiet except for the scrape of metal and the occasional breath drawn deep. As they packed the tools to head back, she glanced at him. You ever think you'd live like this? He looked toward the hills. No, I figured I'd end up riding fence for someone else's land until my back gave out. What changed? He met her eyes. I stopped looking at what I'd lost. Started looking at what I could build. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his as she reached for the shovel. He didn't pull away. That night, she brought out a battered tin box she'd kept tucked in the bottom of her trunk. Inside were a few buttons, a ribbon and a paper folded around something small. Vayden was by the window, trimming the wick on the lamp. She set the item on the table between them. It was a thimble, dented along one side, the metal dulled with age. "My mother gave it to me when I was little," she said. "Said if I kept it, I'd always have a way to make something with my hands." He picked it up gently, turning it over in his palm. "Seems like something worth keeping." "I used to think it was all I had left of her," she said. "But I think maybe the things we carry don't always look like objects." He set it back. "No, sometimes they look like fences that don't fall, or a woman who doesn't quit." The lamp flickered. She stepped closer, her eyes on his. "I want to stay," she said. "You already are." "No, I mean," her voice caught, but she steadied it. "I want to stay because this place doesn't feel borrowed. It feels like I belong in it." He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing gently around hers. "Then stay. Not because you need to, but because you want to." "I do," she whispered. Outside, the wind had laid down. The snow from earlier had melted into the earth, feeding the roots beneath the field where tobacco would grow come spring. Inside, a woman stood with a man who had seen her hunger and placed something more lasting in her hands. A future. One they would build together day by day, not rushed, not forced, just steady like the land. The thaw came late that spring. Ice still clung to the creek rocks, reluctant in its letting go, but the soil had softened enough to take seed. Liora rose with the light, her shawl wrapped tight around her as she stepped barefoot into the yard, the earth cold beneath her soles. The air carried a dampness that clung to her skin, but she didn't mind. It was planting season now, and she had a row of tobacco to tend. Vayden had already hitched the mule to the harrow by the time she returned inside. He was bent over the ledger, tracing new columns with the tip of his pencil. "Did you sleep?" she asked, hanging the shawl near the stove. "Some," he said. "I was thinking on the fencing down by the lower field. If we run a new line there, we might have space for barley." She crossed to the table and set a basket of dried beans beside his elbow. "You think we'll have enough hands to manage it?" "I wrote to my cousin in Nebraska," he said. "He lost his place 2 winters back. Told him if he wanted a second start, there's room here." She sat beside him. "You trust him?" "He's not a man I'd hand a banknote to," he said, "but he'll work if you feed him." She laughed once under her breath. "Well, we've got beans and eggs and more chores than 2 people can carry." He looked over at her. "You still sure about this?" "I've got a finger in every crack of this house," she said. "If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't be sewing curtains for a window no one else sees." He reached for her hand then, rough fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. "You've rebuilt this place with me." She met his gaze. "We built it together." Later that day, she knelt in the soil, pressing tobacco starts into the tilled row. Her palms were stained dark, her knees damp through the muslin of her skirt. Vayden worked a few paces away, checking the coop's latticework and humming low under his breath. She'd never asked what song it was. She just liked the sound of it. By midday, the sun had warmed the patch enough to dry her sleeves. She stood and wiped a hand across her brow. "I've been thinking," she said as he approached with a pail of water. "We might cut a path through the alder. There's wild mint past the ridge. I could dry it for tea." He handed her the pail. "We'll need a blade sharp enough to clear it." "I sharpened the draw knife last week." His brows lifted. "You're ahead of me." She dipped her fingers into the pail, letting the water run over her skin. "I know." That night after supper, he brought out a box she hadn't seen before. It was wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. He set it on the table between them and untied it slowly. Inside was a length of blue calico, folded neat. She touched it gently, thumb brushing the edge of the fabric. "I saw it in town last week," he said. "Figured you'd make a better dress from it than the one you wore here." She looked up at him, eyes full. You remembered the color. You wore a ribbon once, back in Rawlins. It caught the light, her breath caught. I didn't think you noticed. I noticed everything. They stood there a long moment, silence wrapped around them like the quilts she'd mended through winter. Then she crossed the space and laid her hand on his chest. I want to marry you, she said. He didn't move. You sure? I've never been surer of anything. He reached up, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. Then let's do it. The following Sunday, they rode into Saratoga with a pair of borrowed rings tucked into Vayden's coat pocket. The preacher was a quiet man with a kind wife who offered Liora a sprig of lilac for her hair. They stood beneath a cottonwood just leafing out and spoke their vows simply, plainly, with no fuss. Vayden held her hand steady the whole time. They spent that night in the cabin, just the two of them, the fire burning low and her head tucked beneath his chin. Neither of them said much. There wasn't need. The silence between them had long since turned into something full. In the weeks that followed, the barley took root. Vayden's cousin arrived with a battered hat and a mule missing one ear. He slept in the barn and worked without complaint. Liora planted mint and hung her calico dress by the door to finish stitching. The hens laid daily, and the fence held through the first thunderstorm. One evening, just past midsummer, Vayden came in from the field with a small wooden box. He opened it to show her the seeds inside. Peaches, he said. They won't take for years, but I thought maybe someday. She smiled, pressing a hand to her stomach. That's all right, we've got time. The next morning they planted them together just beyond the tobacco row. Years passed. The trees grew, the barn was repaired. The cousin moved on after 2 winters, leaving behind a coiled rope and a mule that stayed until its final season. Liora gave birth to a daughter in the second spring. They named her Clara after Vayden's mother. She grew up with dust on her boots and dirt under her nails and her father's quiet eyes. By the time the peach trees bore fruit, the cabin had grown too, with a porch deep enough for a second rocking chair and a fence that stretched nearly to the creek. Liora stood one evening, the sun low behind her, looking out over the fields. Vayden came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him. You ever miss the way things were? He asked. She shook her head. Not once. He kissed her temple. Me neither. And so they stayed, through seasons thick with snow and summers heavy with green, together. Rooted, whole,